me about anti-Semitism. What's up with that? Why is it so important to you? What is it? And like, how do we spot it? How do we see it? Yeah, wherever you want to take that.
Yeah, wow, that is a big question, but it's an important question.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitism is Jew hatred, and it is as old as the dawn of day. It's been around forever, so it's not unique if someone's an anti-Semite, because unfortunately, it's been a reality. It is something that I have experienced personally, but also just like my own history of like where we're from, dating all the way back to Jews being from Judah, which is inside Israel, and all the way to modern day, even living in Miami, where I've had experiences.
Hmm.
To dive into it, geez, there's a lot of amazing places we can start about it. Where would we like to begin on that?
Yeah. Well, why don't you? I want to say like an almost a very literal definition standpoint. So you said talk about like anti-Semitism. What is a Semite? And like, what is like, where does that like even a word originate from? If you have a sense of that history.
Yeah, so it's originally from like that area in the Middle East where modern day Israel is, and the
Hmm.
definition is hostile or prejudice against Jewish people.
Hmm.
So back, and now we can like really dive into like the history of
Yeah, I
everything.
love
So
that.
yeah, so this is, you can't look at the history of the Middle East without interpreting like religious texts, because
Hmm.
it's so intertwined. But let's say we do want to separate the two. So
Sure.
religious texts used to be how we were just mapping mapping history, where people
Right.
were from, rough timestamps, because the calendars didn't really exist back then with all the like
Hmm.
central tracking like it does now.
Right.
However, you can track anti-Semitism all the way back from the time of Passover, where the Jews were leaving Egypt.
Hmm.
That's something everybody knows. Or if you want to look in more modern day, the time when ancient empires like the Byzantines were around or the Romans were around, and how
Hmm.
they came into Israel to then get rid of the Jews that were living in Israel, and that's how we were end up scattered all over the world. So it all is, it's rooted into such ancient history. And there's this, I remember I used to live in Israel, and there was a shirt that you could buy when you're walking down the street that had all these like ancient civilizations that were listed on the right side. And on the left side was like extinct, 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 extinct. And it had, the last one was the modern regime of Iran. And it was said like
Ah.
future extinct,
Mm.
to kind of show like there's always going to be enemies that are against us, but they're not going
Yeah.
to win. Yeah.
Well, and why, like, in your own sense of things, because this is something that I've, studied even like growing up as a Christian was like, we were always like, oh yeah, like the Jews have been persecuted throughout history forever. Why do you think that is? And then on the other hand, like, what is it that's allowed Jews to be so resilient through all of that? Because that's such a unique part too. Because you said there's been lots of cultures that
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
survived. And specifically with Judaism, what I find is interesting too is like there was never a point in, at least in my knowledge of history, right, where Judaism was like the predominant culture, in which
Mhm.
like Christianity was or Islam was, or where it was just this mass thing, right? But somehow it has always been like, hey, we're gonna keep like going and doing our thing and defining that. So yeah, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is where when you go into the conversation, people need to be open to the concept of religion, just because it's so intertwined.
Yeah.
When those that aren't, it's a little bit harder of a conversation. And I'm coming from a background where I brought up like not religious at all, and I kind of found it on my own. This dates all the way back to just like let's say there was back in the day when God created the earth, created the universe,
Hmm.
and then there was Abraham, who was not the first person. He happened to be
Hmm.
the first Jew from his lineage. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob had a brother named Ishmael, and that's where, or excuse me, Jacob and Esau, and through there, Islam came from that side, and then Jacob,
Hmm.
the Jews came from that side. So and then you continue to like trickle down, and that's where the tribes of Israel came from in modern day Israel, and then the Arabs in the Arabia, a little bit more north in the Middle East. So like that's like it's kind of like understanding how we started to map out, and then around the time of Jesus, Christianity was born. So like
Right.
everything was so centrally located with the three um, core religions. Core I'm defining as like most popular today or there,
Right.
but just give a little background to people. But in regards to why Jews have been around for like 3,000-4,000 years, which I just find mind blowing. It's what I found fascinating was that the culture is the same. What I mean by that, we still practice the same books, read the same, sing the same prayers, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world. Like you can walk into
Hmm.
any synagogue, and it might sound slightly different, but we all can track and follow along with what we're doing, and that hasn't changed even though we haven't lived in the same area together for a long period of time, just due
Mm.
to like enemies casting us all across the world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and talk to me more about that because I think that's one of the most beautiful things that I have seen with the culture. And even when I was really identified with Christianity and was in the religion, like there was always a sense of like, wow, like there's this deep, rich cultural connection that you all have. That is, and I just talked to my friend Hussein about this with Islam as well, or he has this kind
Yeah.
of like cultural tie to it. Whereas, at least the way that I grew up as a Christian, there was no cultural heritage in the same way, and if anything, it was almost this praising of being detached from a cultural heritage that I found. But there's also this sort of like nebulousness. There's a sense of like, for lack of a better word, like being an orphan, right? Where there's like, well, where do I come from?
Oh,
Whereas
interesting.
with you, you have this sense of like, oh, I come from this line of people, and also that you can find those people, you know, anywhere else in the world, right? And you have
Yeah.
this larger tie. So, like, talk to me, what's that like to have that, I guess, that deep ancestral bond in a way, or that deep cultural heritage? What does that do for you?
It, I really like tapped into that past like 2 3 years because I
Mm,
find that stuff so fascinating. So there's a term in Hebrew, Havrusa, means Torah study partner. So when I used to go to yeshiva, which is basically university for Torah studying, I had one of my Havrusas that showed me this paper that literally had every rabbi and then their rabbi, like from like somebody he knew, right? A lineage all the way back to
mm.
Mount Sinai. He could literally trace every person that his rabbi and his rabbi and his rabbi studied from. And like that just blew my mind for in
Yeah.
and whether it's 100% true or not, it was just one of those things. It was just like how the documentation that you can go all the way back and they're studying the exact same thing. And like that was
Yeah.
exactly passed down. Like we all could be in the same study hall and we might be speaking different languages, dressing very differently, but still studying the same
Mhm.
texts all the way dating back, which I thought that was absolutely incredible. There's another joke in the Jewish world called Jewish geography, where
Okay.
you can literally walk up to any Jew and within like 3 to 5 questions, like know somebody that they know. And it's usually like, where are you from? Where'd you go to school? Did you go to sleepaway camp? Did you go on birthright? And go, oh, do you know this person? And it's just like, because we're so
Wow.
small and so like everybody like knows each other that you never feel alone. And
Mm.
to that point, I think it's beautiful because I've moved around a ton in my life, and I only moved to large Jewish cities, like to live, not to visit, like to
Yeah.
live.
Yeah.
And I know I don't need to know people going down there because I just need to find the local Jewish organizations, and they'll put me in the young professional groups, and I'll just meet people. It's like always
Mm.
having a built-in family to go to, and it's very unique and it's
Yeah.
very special.